Okay, perfect. Okay, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we're delighted to have Kathryn Lasky with us today to discuss brand new book, Mortal Radiance. Very pretty cover. And Kathryn has signed some books for us right here. And should you wish to purchase one, I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field. And also, if you have questions for Kathryn, just type them in and Barbara will bring me back on screen in a little bit. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Kathryn, it's lovely to see you. I understand you're on an island where the temperature is roughly half as hot as it is here in Phoenix.
True. Yeah, I think it's 60 now.
Well, in any case, where we really are in this book is we are in Taos, New Mexico, but I should start by saying that this is the second book with Georgia O'Keeffe, and the first one, called Light on Bone, was a big success for us last year. Kathryn, you have a copy you can show us?
Yes, I do. Where did
How
it
wonderful.
They're beside you, isn't it?
No, wait a
Right
minute.
there.
Oh, here it is. Sorry.
That's okay. No problem at all. So can you hold it up just a little bit higher? It's kind of hard to see. So notice the palette, of the books. That one is slightly brighter. This one is a little bit darker, but I love these colors because they're, sort of deserty and, Southwest and all that. So
Yeah.
Kathryn, you had a long and have had a distinguished career as a author of many books before you decided to write a mystery, like 100 books for children and young adults. So what prompted you to turn to crime?
Well, actually, there were changes in the children's book business that I wasn't particularly comfortable with. I felt that it was sort of like too, I don't know what you'd say. Anyhow, they brought in certain restrictions, and I wanted to feel more free. For example, my agent and I had discussed a book about a white girl and a black girl who both have gone through a tragedy of losing a parent, and they become friends.
Mhm.
And when she talked to the publishers about it, they said, well, Kathryn's not black, so we have a problem with this. Could she find a black writer to do it with? And I just thought, this is crazy. I have a lot of black friends, but none of them are writers. Some are librarians and stuff like that. I can't just team up. It sounded like a dating game. And then the funniest was when I thought this was just the neatest idea. It was sort of sci-fi. It was about two girls. One is a clone of the other. This was for young adults. And the clone, they've never met, but then they do meet. And the clone feels that she's uncertain in her gender. She feels she might be transgender. So again, the publisher said, but Kathy's not transgender. And I told my agent to say to them, how do you know that? And so this was just getting a little bit too much for me. And I thought, I think I'd really enjoy writing a mystery. So that's how I got here.
Good. Right. Well, and you picked Georgia O'Keeffe. Now, why in the world would you pick Georgia O'Keeffe as your protagonist?
Well, that's another funny story because I love her now. But when I graduated from college, which was, needless to say, eons ago, my mother said, I think we need to go to New York. I'd gone to the University of Michigan, and I think we need to go to New York and celebrate your graduation. And she'd bought tickets to Broadway shows. And she said, I'm so lucky. I got tickets to the George O'Keeffe show at the Metropolitan. And I said, well, I was never that wild about George O'Keeffe. And my mother almost fainted right there on the street. And she said, I think I'm going to demand a rebate for your college education. And so we went to the show, And the lesson to me was some people, like myself, have to see her paintings in person. And I just fell into them. And actually, I wish I had it here. I wrote a children's book about Georgia O'Keeffe.
Hmm.
It was called Georgia Rises. It was just about one day in her life. And I just found her so fascinating for so many reasons. And so I thought, I'm going to try this, I got to try this. So I did.
You did. Right. No, and very successfully, I might add. I thought that, an artist has such an eye for detail, and sees things differently. And so she was ideal when, it came to working on this crime, because she had a special set of gifts that I thought, you delineated really well. So you picked the 1930s when Georgia is still married to Alfred Stieglitz. He's still alive. And New Mexico is, that's a long way from Stieglitz living on Lake Champlain in New York.
Yeah,
With, in this book anyway, he has a mistress. He and Georgia had a long and complicated relationship, didn't they?
they sure did. Yeah, he had a few mistresses, but there was this one that stuck around for a while. And they were they were very devoted, but they were so different in so many ways.
Hmm.
And and then and this is true. I did all this research on her. Um, she really wanted to have a child, and she became pregnant, and he insisted that she have an abortion.
Yeah.
And that really broke her heart. And it comes up time and time again in these two George O'Keeffe books, and I'm writing another one now. And um it but they did have a good relationship in their own way. They really did, but he was flagrantly unfaithful to her.
He was much older too, wasn't he?
He was much older, much older. And she went out west and it was just what she had a nervous breakdown in 1932, I think it was. And she was hospitalized in a mental institution in New York for several months. And then she came out and she decided to go out to New Mexico, where she had been a couple of times before.
Yeah.
This time it just really stuck. And she went to the Ghost Ranch, and she cured herself out there. And I talk a lot about that. There's one landscape that she paints over and over again, and it just seems so appropriate because it's a mesa, and the mesa is called Changing Woman. And she was a changing woman, which, I toyed with using that as a title, but I thought it was sort of too dictative, telling you what.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think it was subtle enough. So,
Well, I think at least the way you describe it, she and Stieglitz had great respect for each other as artists, as a creators. He's a famous photographer, she is a painter. He apparently painted took a number of nude photographs of her, which
yeah,
I didn't realize. But anyway, you give her a romantic interest in the books in the person of the sheriff. So I guess sort of on the sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander approach, right?
yeah, yeah. She does have this romance with, his name's Ryan McCaffrey, and he's the sheriff of the county. And he is part Indian himself, part Navajo. And they really match. And he's not really artistic at all. He's very funny. And they just get along great. And he has a wonderful sense of humor. So does she. He has more of a sense of humor than Stieglitz, but Stiglitz could be pretty funny too. And they just bond. They're just a match made in heaven.
Right. Well, she's so guilt-free about it that I wanted to establish a bit of a background, as to why she didn't feel any, sort of torturous emotion about Ryan when, Stiglitz is clearly
Running around all over the place.
Yep, very true. So they stay in touch a little bit by phone, but he is not.
Yes, and they
in-
write. They
Yeah.
write back and forth.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, eventually she settles in Abiquiu. I've been to her home in Abiquiu several times and up past Ghost Range. But anyway, in this book, the first book, we're in Santa Fe and Light on Bone. In this book, we are largely in Taos, New Mexico, where Mabel Dodge Luhan, an interesting character in her own right, has an estate. And she is a focal point for what the French probably would have called a salon. Back in the 18th century, but Mabel wants to assemble creative people, writers, painters, and so forth around her. She can afford it. And there is a school, painting school that developed called the Taos School. Was that really Mabel, were those artists drawn to Los Gallos, her home? Or was that kind of a separate thing?
I think it was a little bit separate. She had all sorts of artists at her home, poets, dancers,
Right.
all that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, I don't think we can give her credit for inventing the Taos School.
Okay. But she probably helped support some of them.
Oh gosh, she helped support so much. She
Yeah.
really,
I mean, you can see a lot of their paintings. If you go to Santa Fe, go to the Santa Fe Art Museum, and there are a number of examples of the Taos School. Georgia O'Keeffe used to have, she might still have 2 or 3 paintings in the Santa Fe Art Museum, but there is now a museum in Santa Fe, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, which
Yeah.
has a much bigger collection of
yeah.
the work. And she also, and I have one somewhere, she designed at least one poster for the Santa Fe Opera, which was wonderful. It's one of her flower posters.
Yeah.
And I have one of those. So, she lived to be almost 100. When did she die? It wasn't even that long ago.
She died, I think, in 1986.
Was
She
it
was
that?
99, I think, when she died. And I can never remember exactly the dates, but I think it was 1986 when she died. And I think she was born in, well, that would have been 1894 or something like that. But
Right. Well, so she's what, roughly 1935. She's roughly 40 then.
yes, oh yeah,
in
she's
your
over
book.
40. Yeah. But I would like, if I can, to talk about, people keep saying, well, why did you set it then? And
Okay. Why did you?
because I find the 30s really fascinating.
Mhm.
And I think that's because of, well, I'm going to hold up a picture here. My aunt and my mother,
Oh,
and there they are in 1935, I think, on their way to Europe. Now, they were really adventurous, and my mother, I come from Indiana, and during the Depression, my mom worked for an orphanage. She had got a degree in social work, and she would drive around Indiana, and this fascinated me, picking up children who were abandoned out in the rural parts, and she'd bring them back to the orphanage. And I mean, it just sounded so daring and exotic to me. And my aunt, the woman who was standing next to her, my aunt joined the Waves, which was the Women's Auxiliary something. It was sort of a part of the Navy for women.
possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, and she was married in her uniform. And I said to somebody, women in the 1930s were really bold. And they continued into the early 40s because so many men were at war. And like my aunt married somebody, he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and she was married in uniform and all of that. And it all seems so daring and adventurous to me. And then I'm really a child who was raised in the 50s, and it was all so boring. And I said to somebody, it was like, my mom was so, and she still did stuff, but it was like, we went from the 30s to the 50s, and it was like avocado colored refrigerators and stuff like that. Although my mother was very active. She was one of the founders of Planned Parenthood in Indiana. So, but it just seemed to me so daring what women were doing in the 30s. And so that was another thing that attracted me to setting it in that period. A lot was going on.
A lot was going on, and technologically it was still, very few roads, all kinds of
Oh,
stuff. And so, that gives you a lot of scope for setting up scenes, and all of it would be harder in a more advanced time. But besides, if she were in the 50s, she'd be approaching 60, and a lot of what she does would be harder to believe because it does take physical strength.
yes.
The whole bit. So no, I thought the 30s were great. And I've been to Taos many times, and Taos is still kind of remote compared to in fact, John Sanford just wrote a wonderful thriller called Toxic Prey, in which he has to box in the bad guys, and he chooses Taos to do it because there are only really two exit roads, and they could monitor the roads, and kind of confine this group of people to Taos.
Oh, what is the name of that book again?
It's called Toxic Prey, Toxic. It's one of his prey novels. You'd love it. And almost all takes place in Taos.
Yeah.
But my point is that Taos today is not that different compared to, many places than the Taos that you're writing about. So D.H. Lawrence, there's a really interesting figure. And Mabel Dodge Lewin was the supporter of D.H. Lawrence, wasn't she?
Yes, yes. She had met him in about 1929. He came out there. He was lured out there by Mabel Dodge Lewin. I mean, she just was beating on him to come out there, and he came out with his wife Frida, and then Mabel gave them a house out there. And then he died. I mean, he'd go back, he had a villa in France, and he'd go back there, I guess, in the summers. Maybe it was too hot for him in New Mexico. But anyhow, he died in France, and he died in about, I don't know. He'd been dead for 3 years. And Mabel decided that she wanted, and this is true, and this kicks off the whole book, that she wanted him to be buried in Taos, or where they were, which was outside of Taos, just outside of Taos. And so she had him dug up and incinerated, cremated, and his ashes sent. And then she wanted to build a chapel for him. Well, everybody kept saying, oh, and she was going to put his ashes in the chapel. Oh, don't do that. He loved those hills behind your house so much. Scatter him in the house. And she just got so fed up with all these people telling her what to do with her husband's ashes that she finally put him in a cement mixer, mix them up, and used that as part of the altar for the chapel. Well, people were just furious. As soon as I read that, I thought, oh my God, this is a book. This is the kickoff of this book. How can you resist something like that really happened in real life? And so that's sort of the start of the book.
Well, it is, but it wasn't Mabel, wasn't it Frida the widow who threw the ashes into
Oh,
the
yeah. Did I say it was Mabel? No, it was
right.
Frida.
No,
It's
it was
Frida.
Frida. Yeah,
Frida was
who
sorry
came to
about that.
Taos with a friend that she squabbled with and ended up throwing in the ashes. Now, Frida's an interesting person. I had to look all these people up because I was so interested in it. She was a countess or something, a German,
Yeah.
and had some kind of a title, not a particularly handsome woman, if I recall.
No.
And Lawrence, I thought they were an odd couple. I mean, you're looking at Stieglitz and O'Keeffe, but what was the deal with Lawrence and Frida? Did you look into that at all?
Well, a little bit. I think that she was definitely the instigator of this romance. Frida was. Um, and I don't know that much, but I read some of their love letters that were very convincing.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. He died of tuberculosis. He died, fairly young, as you
Yeah.
say, back in France. So anyway, when the book opens, that Frida, a friend, and the Ashes have arrived outside of Taos at Mabel Dodge Lewins, where Georgia O'Keeffe has done, I don't know if she really did this or not, but anyway, she drew the designs for 2 stained glass windows, and a young Native American was a glassmaker, distinguished glassmaker, and so he created these windows for the design. And so
Yeah,
you set
that's
it,
not true.
is it?
No, she didn't do that,
She
but
didn't
I
do
just
that.
thought that was a nice touch. And there are no stained glass windows in the chapel.
I saw a photo of it, and I wondered, in fact, if you'd made that up. But
Very
the reason,
simple looking.
right? The
You know,
reason
that's the great thing about writing fiction. You can make up a stained glass window.
you absolutely can. But the reason this all works out is that when Georgia goes in the next morning to see how the stained glass is looking, amazingly, she finds a body in the chapel.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really where the mystery kicks off. So
Yeah.
tell us about the victim, although we never get to meet her.
The victim is a potter, a very well-known young potter, Flora Naminga, and she gets murdered. Nobody knows why, and it was very brutal. And that happens. And then
Right. Well, the investigation obviously is going to be about Flora's murder,
Yeah.
and these other things are kind of sidelines. But what's really interesting, at least, is that for Wallace Simpson is there, apparently slightly on vacation from her romance with Edward, Prince of
Yeah.
Wales.
Duke of Windsor. Windsor,
Right.
right.
So he's at a distance. But anyway, she's in New Mexico, and you portray her as a really dreadful person.
I think she was. I read a lot about her,
Hmm.
and she was very anti-Semitic. She was really out for money. She just kept wanting more and more money, and they were lying to Churchill about how they were so poor and that this and that, and he gave them, and Churchill allowed, because I guess that's how it goes, allowed for him to have a lot of money, but then he found out that they had lied about their poverty and they weren't nearly that poor. But that's another thing that gets me sort of, which is interesting, because I remember my mom and my Aunt Mildy, the ones I showed you the picture of, in the 50s, they just thought the the Duchess of Windsor was just the most fabulous looking, stylish woman in the world. Yeah, I never understood it, but she was a fashion icon. And this stuff about them being so anti-Semitic hadn't come out. And my family's Jewish, and boy, if it had. And when it did come out, my mother said, I can't believe Aunt Mildy and I worshiped this woman so much. She was horrible, horrible. But she really was horrible. And she had affairs while she was Going with the Duke of Windsor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, he had affairs and mistresses too, and so had she. But I think in the 50s, people still bought into the idea that it was a great romance, that he gave up the throne for the woman he loved. And she was, so skinny. She was just, like a clothes horse. And because of all the money, she was able to wear amazing clothes, and the prince gave her amazing jewelry. But if you read about them the rest of their lives, it was he remained devoted to her, but it doesn't appear that she was devoted to him particularly. And they were trapped in their own story. There was
yeah,
nowhere to go.
yeah, yeah. They were big mooches. And now I just found out recently that they made one of George's sister, oh God, I can't remember her first name now, married very well, was extremely wealthy, and had a place in Palm Beach and one in Newport. And the Duke and Duchess of Windsor sucked up to her, and she would invite them all the time to Palm Beach. She even built a special room for them or apartment for them. Yeah, this really shocked me. I only found this out a few weeks ago.
Nazis.
Yeah, and they were Nazis. Yeah, that's right. And,
Well, I think it's an interesting aspect of the book that we find Wallace Simpson, the last person we would actually expect to find in Taos, New Mexico in 1935. But her behavior has a lot to do with, or her connections with, how the story plays out, because it's not just a murder mystery. There may or may not be a spy ring going on in New Mexico. And so in part, it's a mystery, and in part of it's an espionage novel. So I must say that you really mixed up a lot of interesting things in this, Kathryn.
well, in the first book, Light on Bone, there's a little bit of espionage stuff, and there's this I called it the Lutzen ring, I think I called it. And then I found out when I was about halfway through writing that book that there really was one. Just the way it was called something else, which was the Duquesne ring. And actually, Rachel Maddow had a whole show on that.
That's right.
And I just, when I was writing the book, I thought, I'm making this up. And I do a lot of research, and I hadn't come across the Duquesne. I said, this is great. I just felt so vindicated.
Yeah.
You
But there have been several books that have, talked about, there's a wonderful book called December 41 that actually, based on research, that there was a Nazi bunker in Los Angeles,
Yes, that was written by my friend, Bill Martin.
That's right, which I thought was a really fascinating book. And Susan Elia McNeil wrote a very good book, again, in Los Angeles, about an active German spy ring. You and I both grew up in the Midwest, you in Indiana and me in Illinois. And we know that, the very heavy German population in Wisconsin and in Missouri. And so, there was a lot of, well, here comes a dog. Hello there. There was, in fact, a number of, a lot of Nazi sympathizers or German sympathizers throughout the United States. We were not, looking back, it's like, oh, everybody was, prepared to fight. Everybody was anti-German, but that's not true at all.
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
But anyway, I love the fact that you brought all that, into a really unlikely place like Taos, New Mexico, which is, as I said, is still isolated today, but it was even more so back then. And so you have some interesting jurisdiction issues, because Santa Fe they're different counties, aren't they? Isn't Santa Fe County is not the same as Taos?
No, it's not. Yeah, I mean, they're different.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have law enforcement, with different, you have the local law enforcement, you have the Santa Fe sheriff, you've got Native American, whatever all that is going on. So it's a complicated situation for investigating.
Yeah, and of course, at that time, and I think I give a number, I looked this up, there were only something like less than 50 police officers in the whole state
Right.
of New Mexico.
Well, I'm not at all surprised. In the 1930s, C.J. Box in his books points out how few people there are as game wardens and law enforcement in Wyoming to this.
Yeah,
But Wyoming's population today is still something like under 700,000 people. You know,
yeah.
so it's a huge territory. And northern New Mexico is not densely populated.
No, we were just out there.
Yeah, I mean, and Taos Pueblo, which is, I mean, it's as far as I know, has a separate jurisdiction, doesn't it? Because it's some kind of, it's bound to be federal or whatever it is, like other.
And then there are the Navajo lands, and they have
That's
their
right.
own police force that
They
Tony
do.
Gorman, of course, wrote about.
Yeah, well, we have that here. We have the Pima reservation is just to the east of Scottsdale, and they have their own police force. And every once in a while, there'll be like a car chase or something, and somebody will drive into the reservation or drive off it, and then there's all this jurisdictional stuff about who should be chasing them and what happens. So New Mexico is there are reservations, but there are also all those pueblos
Yeah.
that stretch up certainly from Albuquerque if you come up on the train, or by bus or drive, whatever it is you go by. And now all of them have casinos. So, they're all kind of visible and lit up, but that wasn't true in the 1930s. Many of them were pretty hard scrabble.
Yeah. So,
Mention this, the other books you're working
hmm.
Right. I'm hearing
Oh.
Coach in the background. You want to talk about other books you're working on?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm working on.
Thank you, Coach.
Let's see. Sometimes I get them a little mixed up in my own head. I'm working on two more, actually.
Okay.
Well, I just got one back to go the editorial, to edit. And I'm about 2/3 of the way done with editing that one. And then I have one that I've just completed a first draft of. So sometimes I kind of get mixed up which book I'm in.
I can imagine. Are these all Georgia O'Keeffe?
Yeah, they are. I'm very happy writing about her forever, really. Part of the challenge is I'm not artistic myself. I can't draw a straight line, but I love getting into her head. And I've studied her paintings enough. And, she did have this sort of odd thing called synesthesia. I talk about it and certain people have this where music will trigger a visual image, or a visual image will trigger some music. It's an overlap of sensory perception, and one sense opens up another. And she loved music. She listened to music all the time. She loved Pablo Casals. And so to write about that, to me, is very interesting, even though I could never do the paintings. It's very interesting to me. And one of her favorite places to paint, and that's in this book that I'm just got a rough draft of, was a place called the Black Place, which was in northern New Mexico, kind of close, I guess, to the Colorado bit. It's near Farmington, New Mexico.
Oh, that's out west, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, it's above Chaco.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
not far from Chaco.
It's very close to Chaco, but it's so weird. The landscape there, it's all black. It's really, the geology is
What is it?
phenomenal.
It must be volcanic.
Hmm?
It
What?
must be volcanic, like the
It
Malpa.
is volcanic, but it's just like a history of the earth there. They
Right.
find dinosaur bones, everything. And there are some good archaeological sites, and that's what I'm sort of focusing on. And my husband and I drove out there, and I mean, it's just spectacular, but it's the weirdest landscape you've ever seen.
Really?
And you can look up her paintings from the Black Place. It just looks like, well, she has one description. She says it looked like a mile-long parade of elephants because of
Wow.
the
Well,
colors.
we've driven up through the Bisty Badlands, you know, through the Hoosier.
That's it. It's in the Bisty Badlands.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
I don't remember it being black, but we have driven it. You have to go up north from Gallup on and then I think I'm trying to remember where we stayed. I think we stayed there. And then you can actually drive across reservation and come into the caldera behind Santa Fe at Cuba, and then drive, you know, through the caldera all the way over to Santa Fe. Or you can drive around the lake up north to Abiquiu, where Georgia was, and come down. So she wasn't that far from the Bisty Badlands when she lived in Abiquiu.
Yeah, but it took a while for her to get there in those
Well,
days.
and yeah, without, you know, modern highways and
Well,
cars.
then I have them having to ride horses in for the last part of it.
Yeah, I
But
can imagine that would be true. You bet.
course, now, if you go there, you see a lot of oil rigs because they discovered oil
Ah.
early in the 40s. So there are a lot of
Right.
oil rigs there.
Well, one of the great things about writing historical fiction is that you don't have to age anybody because they're already, you know, they're already way back. So you can write a series and you can actually start the next one, you know, like the day after the one before ends, and nobody knows how unrealistic it is. So you know, you can keep her at this age and you can stay in the 1930s for a whole bunch of books.
Yeah, yeah. And then it's, I think I'm looking too far ahead, but I mean, when the war breaks out, World War II, I think that'll be an interesting thing too. So we'll see how that works. But I
Right.
can stay in the 1930s.
You can.
And yeah, and I think, and she kept staying out there longer and longer. So there's plenty, but she did take some trips. Dole Pineapple hired her to come to Hawaii and paint something for them. And she went out there and she never painted a pineapple. And then she came back and they said, "Hey, you never painted a pineapple. Could you paint a pineapple for us?" So she just sort of knocked one out and sent it to him.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and where was he? Oh,
Maine.
she also went to a place in Maine. I have to
York.
ask, where was it?
York.
York, Maine. She had friends there, so I could set something in Maine, but I think Catherine Hall Page kind of has the stamp on Maine.
Oh, she's a wonderful Maine writer, and there's several others. Paul
Well, yeah,
Duncan.
our friend Rick
Tom Ricks.
Tom Ricks has just come out with Tom Ricks, who's always written political books, nonfiction political. He was a correspondent for the New York Times, and now he has changed to writing a mysteries, and he has one, and it's called Everybody Knows But You. Everyone Knows But You. And it's done very well in the few weeks it's been out. And it's all set in Maine. We have a lot of writers up here. In my
You
book,
do.
Light on Bone actually won the Maine Crime Writers Award a year ago. So that sort of surprised me.
That is interesting. Well, so it goes to Maine authors, but not necessarily Maine landscapes, is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I love that. No, Tess Gerritsen wrote a book called Spy Coast and is writing a series set in Maine. Michael Carita, Paul Doiron, a whole bunch of Maine writers. So you're
Yeah.
in good, very good company.
It's evocative country for,
Beautiful country. Yeah,
and well, you could write a lot of spy novels here.
you're good. And also, you know, great climate for writing. Keeps you indoors in the winter and all that good
And sometimes in the summer too.
I'm so envious of your climate. So Patrick, come and join us and see if we have, or you have any questions to ask Kathryn about New Mexico or the series or whatever.
Or D.H. Lawrence. Yeah. What an interesting
That too.
character. When was he there? D.H. Lawrence? It was
Well,
towards,
he was there in the very late 1920s. And he wasn't there for that many years, and then he went back and he died. But she lured him here, there, because she started writing him years before he actually came. And then I would say he took the long way around because he went from Europe to New Zealand for some reason. Then on his
scenic
way
route.
back from New Zealand came to Taos. So I don't know whether he was trying to avoid her or what, but he just said, I'm coming, but it'll take me a few years. And then she said, well, I'll buy you a house or I'll give you a house or something.
Isn't there the D.H. Lawrence Ranch or house or something still there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is. I don't know whether you can visit it or not. Maybe you can.
I don't know. It's northwest of Taos. I looked it up, but I haven't
Yeah.
ever tried to go there. But and Mabel's house, Los Gallos, is now a hotel.
We stayed there.
Oh, you have?
Yes,
Ah,
we
okay.
stayed there just because when I was writing this book, I I couldn't get out there or something. I don't know,
Was
but
the-
I
the
looked.
pandemic.
No, it wasn't the pandemic then. But anyhow, we just got there. I got it pretty correct, I'm pleased to say. We stayed there and it's very nice. And my proudest moment was we hiked around and we saw, and in the book, I might refer to the pink house where she'd like to
You do.
stay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we saw this house and it had sort of scraps of pink paint on it and a sort of falling off shutter that was pink. And so I said, Chris, I think this is the pink house. So he said, well, it was really broken down and looked kind of derelict. He said, well, sit on the steps and I'll take your picture. So I was sitting there on the steps and this old man came out, very grouchy. What are you doing here? Why are you here? And I forget, what did I say? I said, oh, well, we just thought it looked so nice. It didn't look nice at all. It was just all broken down. He said, well, I live here. It's not abandoned. I live here. So we skedaddled out. But then we asked the owner, and we said, is that the pink house? And they said, yes. And I don't think we asked them about the grouchy old man. But when you've researched a lot and then you find something and you find something obscure, and then you find that obscure thing really, it's there still. It's a really good feeling, you know.
Imagine. So, no, you mentioned the pink house several times, and I tried to find it on Google, but I couldn't. So, because I
No,
really like, increasingly I find, I don't know if you do this, Patrick, but increasingly I find if I'm reading about a place I don't really know, I look it up.
I do all the time. Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
do.
it's so handy with the phone, right? But
Yeah.
the international thrillers, especially, I have no idea where some of these places are or how they function. And it really helps I think, to look them up. So I did look up Los Gallos and the Pink House and all the rest of it just to see whereabouts outside Taos it is, and found it
Yeah.
out. Yep.
And it was pretty close to the way I imagined it. It really was. Of course, all of her artwork is not there. All of uh, Mabel Dodge Lewin's artwork, it's not in the house.
No. No, she left it all, or somebody, her heirs left it to charity, if I remember.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that.
But anyway, it's in Santa Fe. Oh, a lot of it is now. Sorry,
Yes.
Patrick, any questions?
Let's see. There's some questions about what are some of your writing habits like? Do you write longhand? Do you write on a computer? Are you a morning writer, evening? How does that work?
Well, I write on a computer and I am an all-day writer, but I can't really write after 6 in the evening. By then I'm shot. And so that's kind of what I do. And each phase now it's kind of funny because I'm overlapping with these books. And I'm saying, oh no, that's not in this book. That was in the other book. I can't use that again. But I generally keep it straight, you know? So, yeah.
How about the title Mortal Radiance?
Well, I seem to like to have something about light in all these books because I talk so much about light. And so the first one was called Light on Bone. The next one was called Mortal Radiance. The next one was called not
Slanted light.
slant of light, slanted light. And I have the Emily Dickinson poem sort of kicking it off about there's something about a slant of light. It's a beautiful poem, but of course I can't remember it right now. And then the one I'm just gearing up for is called Sacred Light. But I mean, light is such a part of her being, of Georgia's being. So I like to try and put it in whenever I can. And Mortal Radiance seemed to fit with this book, seeing as the murder happens in a chapel with stained glass windows, and it all seemed to
Although
work.
I think the light of Taos, it's the light of Greece is often referred to, as inspirational or helpful to the old Greek artists, the ancient Greek artists and so forth. And the light of northern New Mexico is often compared to that. And I'm sure that one reason she liked it there was because of the extraordinary light.
Oh, absolutely. And we've been ourselves to her house in Abiquiu a few times. And the first time I went, I just thought, oh, this is so beautiful. You want to come back and throw out every stick of furniture in your own house. And then you realize it won't work. We don't have that light. And I mean, I live in Boston in the wintertime, and you just don't have that light. And the light is such a part of that Abiquiu house.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yes.
mention Patrick when we started out, but I mentioned that Kathryn was a children's book writer, so I should have said that her books have received numerous awards, including a Newbery Honor, a Boston Globe Hornbook Award, and a Washington Post Children's Book Guild Nonfiction Award. She's twice won the National Jewish Book Award, and her books have been translated into 19 languages. So, I think all of that is a wonderful background. But I admire her for switching, whatever the reasons, to writing crime and to doing it so well.
Well, I'll probably go back to children's books. I mean, let them get over these growing pains that they're going through now.
It's a very tough time to be in children's fiction because there's so many different cultural and political groups involved, and with book banning and whatever. I think it'd be very hard to
Yes,
to
it is.
write
I do
something.
have a children's book coming out called Glass in August, which is sort of a inside out version of the Cinderella story, kind of told from the fairy godmother's point of view. But I'm just very happy writing the George O'Keeffe ones now. And somebody said, well, do you think you'd want to take on another artist? And I thought, no, I don't think so. I mean,
Right.
maybe, but I'm really happy with Georgia here.
Are you a big mystery fan or mystery reader yourself?
I'm not a huge one, not a huge one. And I'm very picky. I would say one of my favorite mystery writers is James Lee Burke. I just one of the reasons I like him is I think he writes about landscape and light so beautifully. And then who else?
One of his titles was A Stained White Radiance,
Oh yeah.
which was I think that was Shelley, maybe a Shelley quote. But yeah, he's a sensualist, definitely.
And who's the other I'm turning to my head. Oh, Tony Hillerman. And I have to be careful about that because I don't want people to think I'm trying to write a Tony Hillerman book. And I like Catherine Hall Page, of course.
Of course you would.
And I'm trying to think of the other ones, but I like, you introduced me to the guys, Preston.
Oh,
What-
Douglas Preston, of course.
Oh my God. So I think I bought my first one at your shop
Uh-huh.
and I read it and I'm a slow reader. I read it so fast. And then he leaves you hanging at the end of the first of that book, which was 2 years ago. And the next one was supposed to come out last August and it didn't. Is it out now?
Mhm. Well, there's a book coming out this August. Are you talking about the Nora Kelly book? Are you talking about Dead Mountain?
I don't know. I thought I was talking about the one that would have followed
Was it a Pendergast?
Cabinet of Mr.
Oh, you
Doctor.
were reading the Pendergast, not the Nora Kelly.
Yeah.
Okay, because he has a phenomenal New Mexico book called Dead Mountain. I mean, it is just amazing. And that came out last August.
It came out last August and I missed it.
Oh,
And
it's not the with Lincoln. It is with Lincoln. No, yeah, it is with Lincoln Child, but it's not a Pendergast. It's a Nora Kelly book. They have written books about Santa Fe characters. So I'll email you the titles.
you'll email me the title?
I will, yeah, because you'd really like them. I love them. I think Dead Mountain is absolutely brilliant, but it's a great New Mexico story.
Oh, great, because I need a new book. to
Okay.
read.
A question. I have a question that's come in about what age range is the Glass, your children's book, kind of
It's
aimed at?
middle grade, squarely middle grade. Like 8 through 12 or 13.
Okay.
Yeah, HarperCollins.
Okay. Anything else, Patrick?
Well, someone was asking, Barbara, did you ever ski in Taos?
No.
Barbara's not a skier.
Well, I was once.
Oh, really?
Long time ago, before my right leg became crippled, I could do stuff like that. I can't do it now. But years ago, when I was a junior at Stanford, we took a ski trip and we went up to Lake Tahoe. And having never been on skis and wearing only a white cotton shirt and having no idea what I was doing, I attempted to ski the women's slalom Olympic, because they'd had the Olympics. And in the end, this is when skis snapped on, you didn't have the boots and the whole thing. One of my skis came off and I couldn't get it back on, so I couldn't ski down. So I had to put it on my shoulder and hike down to one of the towers of the ski lift and climb up it where they had a phone. And I called down and they had to send up the lift for me because by then the whole thing was closing, and rode back down. I was freezing. And I decided that skiing was not for me. It's a true story. I was like 20 years
We
old.
love to ski. We haven't been in years. We skied in Santa Fe about 10 years ago. I loved it.
Yeah, our grandson loves skiing in Santa Fe. And so we brought him over many times. It's the Santa Fe. I like 10,000 Waves, and the ski basin is further out than the Waves. So I would take him out there, leave him with Rob, my husband, and then I would go to 10,000 Waves. Yay.
Sounds like a nice idea.
It was a wonderful idea.
Yeah,
But
we went there
no,
for
I have not skied in Taos, but we have driven up there and driven around the whole ski area, which is really gorgeous.
Mm, mm.
Sounds
Yeah,
like
I
fun.
don't know whether
except
I could
snow.
still ski.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Patrick,
I
what?
said it sounds like it'd be fun except for the snow part. I don't know. It's just so cold.
Well, it's kind of essential if you want to ski.
Desert
Yeah.
creature.
The snow part. Ski country usually is absolutely beautiful. The ski country of Taos, if I remember right, is kind of northeast, and absolutely up in the Sangre dos Cristos is absolutely beautiful. And the Santa Fe ski basin is also in those mountains. So, an advantage to skiing is in fact the scenery.
And Bandelier is pretty close to the area you're writing about, isn't it? Or not too far away?
Bandelier's to the west of Santa Fe, and it's on the road to out to the Caldera, and it's south and west of Los Alamos. So if
Right.
you go
Beautiful
up the
area.
big hill out of Santa Fe, then you wander around and you eventually get to Bandelier, which really has not been the same since that terrible fire.
Mm,
But it's still really worth seeing. And more accessible now than it once was. The cliff dwellings, they have made them easier to get to, but it's a nifty little park for sure.
very cool.
Yep.
Yeah, and the Chama River goes through Abiquiu, right? Is that the Chama?
I'm
'Cause
trying to remember.
we went up there and
There's a huge reservoir north of, right around Abiquiu, right, Kathryn? There's a great big lake. And then if you drive up, I think it's Highway 60 or whatever it is, you get to Chama, and then there's a magnificent old, although they've really improved it, a narrow gauge train that goes
Yeah.
from Chama to San Antonitas, Colorado. And when Rob and I did it first in the 1990s, it was like cattle cars, but now it's very posh. And there's a stop for lunch and beautiful, beautiful cars, and the scenery is spectacular. So it's one of my favorite things to do in northern New Mexico.
gorgeous.
It really is. All right. Well,
That's
Kathryn,
about
thank
it.
you for spending time with us.
Well, thank
Really,
you.
Mortal Radiance is, I'm happy to say, the second, and now I can't hardly wait for the third and fourth Georgia O'Keeffe, because she's really a wonderful character. These would not be children's books, because I will say there's some occasional moments of fairly hot sex that occur. Good for you, Kathryn, in the book, right? And some real surprises, but I really love this period, and the fact that there were people, of different cultures. Mabel Dodge Lewin's husband was a full-blooded Indian, wasn't he?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, Tony.
Tony Lewin, and who picked out the ranch and all. And people were not nearly into the culture wars that you're seeing today. There was certainly prejudice and racism and all, but it was just different. So I really have enjoyed the series and I recommend it. So night, everybody. Thank you very
Good
much.
night. Thank you so much. Thank you, Patrick. Thank
bet.
you, Barbara.
It was a great pleasure.